that had to culminate in a way that really mattered. I was looking through musicians and I knew I really wanted to do a musical game. I'm making an RPG. I can't make bad music. I played Chrono Trigger, Mario RPG. I've played all the modern RPGs. Like music is one of the most important things always. They spend huge amounts of work and money and time on their soundtracks. And I was like, well, I have to have a really good soundtrack, so I jumped around a bunch. And then I reached out to the creators of Steven Universe because I knew that they were really into games a lot and they liked games. And I thought, so I kind of cold emailed them. I said, hey, I'm working on a game and it's RPG and it's about a bunch of characters. And I think you two would be a really good fit for doing the music for the game because, and I would like to email you with a pitch and also explain more why I think that you two would fit really well. Sarashu just responded, yeah, sure, send us email. Here's my email. So I cold emailed them with, well, not cold emailed, I emailed with a follow-up to that with a whole picture of the game, screenshots, all the characters, what it was all about, and said, well, with your work on Steven Universe, the music played a big role in the growth of the characters. Their music, when a character, evolves or overcomes something, their music changes. When two characters are having a thing, the songs are like a combination of them. And when the characters literally combine, the songs combine with them, the instruments combine. They also worked with a lot of collaborators and they also worked with real instruments. And that's both things I really, really wanted. I wanted vocals and instruments. Ikenfelll is very retro looking, but I wasn't intending to create a retro game. I know it's visually very retro, and it also is inspired by some older games like Earthbound and Pokemon and Fire Emblem. But it's very much modern in so many ways. And once you look at the sound and the music and the writing's very like naturalistic stuff that wasn't in old games aren't really like that. And the puzzle design and the accessibility settings, there's way more about it that's modern than not. And I really wanted that sound. I really wanted music that was a bit retro but also modern that really matched up with the vision of the rest of the game. So retro music that's modern, very character driven, where the music plays a big role in the characters. Well, the composers for Steven Universe are almost the only people that fit all those criteria super well. And I was so lucky that they were actually on a hiatus from Steven Universe at the time, so they had a whole bunch of free time. At that time I emailed them, so they were just like, yeah, this sounds great. They've always wanted to work on a game. This sounded cool. I was a fairly well-known indie game developer, so they're like, all right, let's do it. So then we moved forward to the Kickstarter after that, and we spent a lot of time discussing who to bring in, what songs would be vocal, who we could collaborate with. And because they had spent so much time collaborating with musicians on Steven Universe, they knew the process. They knew about contracting someone to do winds. They knew how to contract a violinist. They knew several people that played all different instruments. They knew that process, so we didn't have to figure that out. We already knew how to do it, and they already had friends that did everything from like all over the States and Canada and all that. So yeah, it was like, it worked out really well, and it was a good fit, and I got lucky with timing.
Nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's great that you had such a clear idea of like the kind of obvious like identity of your game and kind of the way that would mesh really well with their previous work. Because like as I was kind of getting through the story, I have to say, like, I was thinking like I couldn't imagine this with like any other set of composers. Like it's such a good fit.
Yeah, and
beep 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 boopy music,
right?
Like really, it just sort of drained the game.
Yeah, I mean, I do love my chiptune, but I mean, I agree. Like, and I'll be honest, I'm not that familiar with Ikenfelll, but I mean, just from you describing this, I'm like, what was I thinking? Not ever like playing this game now, because music is a big component for me when it comes to games and such. And then obviously your inspiration are things that I absolutely love too. But just how you said everything and described it, it's just like, I don't see how people couldn't pick up the game after hearing that, to be quite frank. But in addition to that, I mean, a lot of what you were talking about was like, there's a lot of moving parts in these collaborations, and then there's what?
So many.
Yeah, right. And there's so many other like forms of collaboration going on that you may not have been a part of just because they were so limited in a way where like you didn't necessarily need to be involved because you're involved in so many other things. So were there any challenges in the communication and just making sure that everybody was on the same page and aligned with your vision of the project? And if so, what did you do to kind of like manage those challenges?
One of the big reasons a lot of companies, even mid-sized indie game companies or AA companies, have producers or people who manage groups, directors. There's kind of different. Those roles actually are different depending on the size of companies. Like producers will often wear way more hats in smaller companies than they will in larger ones, stuff like that. But the reason those people manage, that's what they do. They spend all their time managing and like making people work together and making sure everyone's getting what they need, is because that is a full-time job and it's a tremendous amount of work to make everyone happy. And the big challenge for me was I just was doing everything else and I just couldn't do that well enough. I wouldn't send an email to the music people for months sometimes because I was just crunching on some deadline. Or they would, and another big one was Steven Universe picked up again, and they just were like, well, we got to do this because that's their job. And and so they just were gone for like a year while Cartoon Network just kept throwing more and more work at them. Really, really challenging work. And they loved Ikenfelll, but obviously that was priority. Like that was their main gig, and it was a huge project and with a lot of fans. So that was a big challenge as well. And so, yeah, just wrangling them all. I was so bad at it. Thankfully, the audio team was really organized, pestered me a lot, reminded me stuff a lot. They had a Trello, and they're like, here's your list, do the list. Can you do the list by Monday? And I'm like, yeah, I can. Thank you. So it was a lot. I felt like a lot of the time that the other teams were managing me, like poking me to do stuff instead of, like, I guess that's what you do when you're a producer. Someone messages you like, hey, I need this, or hey, you're blocking me.
Right.
But I think a person who's better at that job, a lot better than me, would spend a lot more time doing the reaching out and checking in on people all the time. And I wish I'd done that a lot more. That's very hard. It takes a lot of work. But yeah, the big part was just like, that's another job I had to do. Bringing in collaborators added like 2 more jobs. Like I had 2 more roles in the project that I didn't have before. And I was already doing 5. And that was just ill-advised, but I feel like I never had a choice. So that's just like super challenging, and I don't really recommend it if you can avoid it for projects, because you just won't do as good of a job as you could, and you put yourself at risk of letting people down in all kinds of ways. So, which I did do, but hopefully we made up for it in a lot of other ways as well. And I'm just glad it's done.
Yeah. Well, a quick follow-up to that is, do you think in part, though, because clearly you identified the challenges and in ways that you maybe have, in retrospect, you would have done things, paid more attention to them or whatever, but it does sound like, and what you shared with us earlier, the clear vision, just from the initial point of reaching out to them and contacting these people, and then going through whatever your vetting process was to making sure, like, hey, these are like legit people that are organized and professional and everything else. It sounds like that in a way was probably a saving grace for you, because I'm thinking, if let's say they just weren't together or as on top of it, I mean, I'm sure that could pose a lot more problems. So I would say I would commend you on probably having the clarity of that vision, so it was easily communicated, and then obviously vetting out good people made this work out really well.
Yeah, having a clear vision helped a lot. We sat down with everybody, anyone who joined the project, and we talked through. Sometimes we'd play through as much of the game as possible. I would tell them the whole story. Whenever the musicians are working on an area, they would just grill. They would drill me with questions about who, why did they do this? What matters to them here? What's important? Is this part scary? Do we want it to be quiet? That sort of thing. A lot of that stuff. Also, I was always way ahead, which is, it's hard to believe, but the game was always way ahead of music and audio, probably because those take a huge amount of work, and everyone was working on multiple projects. The audio team was doing 3 other games. Wow. The audio team is Shell in the Pit. The audio for Ikenfelll was headed up by M. Halberstad, and Millie Wissar also came on late, and Rachel Sim also worked on sound. So we had several sound people working on the project, and they were all doing different games. M did the sound for A Night in the Woods, and just Night in the Woods, I believe. Entitled Goose Game. Like she's done some like huge projects, like successful projects. She just has like hit after hit after hit. So she was working on all kinds of stuff at the same time. So I was always kind of ahead. So whenever someone had to do work, they were like, "Okay, what can I do next?" I'd be so like, "Oh, I'll send you 4 hours of videos and you can do audio over them and put it in the Trello for me." So yeah, having a very clear idea about what everything was and what everything meant, and then always kind of being a step ahead with the actual game made it a little bit easier for me to just be like, here's a giant list, please do it, and just ask me if you have any questions. And if I don't answer and accidentally ghost you or get tired, please just keep bugging me. Please keep bugging me. You have to bug me. I'm so tired.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I guess kind of with that then, how did the relationship with Humble Games come about, and did you kind of anticipate that level of involvement? Like, did you reach out to them? What did that process look like for you?
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff I talked about where I needed to stop taking on jobs, that's where Humble was just amazing. Yeah, I'm so glad we brought them in. I reached out to several publishers, and we were actually in several weeks to months long conversation with publishers that I just won't mention now because it's all kind of secret. But and a couple of them fell through. A couple just were taking forever. And then Humble just reached out. It was John Bolson, who's someone I've known in indie games for a long time. He used to be a reporter, and he would write about my old games on indiegames.com and stuff. And yeah, he reached out and he knew that he liked a lot of my old games like Skull Pogo and a bunch of the stuff I'd worked on. And he knew people who'd collaborated with me. So he knew he had a pretty good idea that this game was going to be pretty good. It was going to be finished. It did, but sometimes it sure felt like it wasn't going to get finished. But so he believed in it, and so that was when they were starting their publishing sector. I think Ikenfelll was one of the first 2 games they picked up to kick off their publishing, and it was just Humble Bundle at that point. It wasn't Humble Games. They actually rebranded as Humble Games, the publishing sector. After that, and he reached out and was just like, "Hey, we do this," and I was like, "Cool." And I would email him, and he'd email me back in 10 minutes with answers. And it was just always like that with John. He just always emailed me back right away. And I was just like, it was such, I don't want to poop on any publishers because it's hard work. And a lot of them are juggling lots of stuff and money and budgets and all this. But I just couldn't believe how fast the interactions were. I'm like, "Hey, John, can you get Sony on a call? Sony's on a call tomorrow. Hey, John, can you get Steam tech support for me? I'm having trouble with the Steam backend. Steam tech support on the call with me minutes later." It was always like that. And that was, oh my gosh, that stuff, every one of those things would have taken me, I would have been crying, yelling at my screen. It just would have been so much work and tiresome grunt work that I just didn't want to do and couldn't have done. And so when Humble came in, and then they had a marketing team, and they helped organize QA, and then they got me deals with all the consoles, and they got us onto Xbox Game Pass, and it was just one thing after another. They just did it, and then asked me questions, and they let me approve of everything. They never did anything without my approval. They never told me what to put in the game, what not to put in. They never said, "Oh, don't put that in there, or don't remove the gay people," or anything like that. They didn't do that stuff. They just were like, "This is your game. It's our job to promote it. And we'll maybe give you some suggestions, but we're never gonna stifle you. We just really want to help you get there." And they reiterated that a lot, and that was really good. This game would have taken 10 years if they didn't have Humble, and it would have been on PC and probably crashed a lot more.
Yeah. And one thing I just want to call to that, and things that we have discussed here on the show before in previous episodes, is simply communication, especially when it comes down to publishers. I mean, to Chevy's point, publishers can be really busy and everything else, but when you're working with someone, or even not even working with someone yet, how they communicate and everything can really go a long way, and then show up front what to expect. And in Chevy's case with Humble Games, that clearly transitioned all the way through to the end of publishing. So again, communication's key. And clearly that paid off well for you.
Yeah, it's also a lot of work. Like I said, emailing someone is a huge amount of work. Asking the right questions, knowing who to reach out to, making sure you're reaching out to them often enough. That stuff's so much work. When you're, I'm struggling. My AI system's got to crash, and I need to fix it, or the game's never going to ship. It's hard to think about emailing your music person to see how they're doing when you're like crying because you can't fix a bug in your code. Like, I'm not in a mental space to do that. And so, yeah, not only is communication important, but it's also a huge amount of work not to be underestimated.